Hey, I'm glad you're here. Welcome to Wapkutim Mapkutio, which means you're listening to me, I am listening to you. I'm Aurélie Zephyr, a licensed therapist, and this podcast is a safe space for the Haitian community to talk openly about mental health, trauma, anxiety, depression, and more, and learn practical tools to help us heal and grow. On this show, we'll have honest conversations, share tips you can actually use, and explore how taking care of your mental wellness can help you show up as your best self for you, your family, and your community. Whether you're just starting your mental health journey or looking to go deeper, this podcast is here to guide you. So, take a deep breath, settle in, and let's listen, learn, and heal together. Just a quick note before we get into today's episode. This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only, and it is not a substitute for individual therapy. Okay, y'all, let's get into it. Welcome back to another episode of Wapkutim Mapkuteo. Today we are talking about a topic that sits deep in the heart of many families, especially Haitian families: intergenerational trauma. The pain we inherit, the patterns we repeat, the wounds we don't recognize until they show up in our parenting, in our relationships, in our fears, and in the ways we see the world. This episode is about understanding where those patterns come from, how trauma gets passed down, and how we can begin breaking those cycles with compassion, awareness, and intention. So, intergenerational trauma, it's what happens when a wound, either emotional, psychological, or even physical, is never processed, never talked about, and never healed. So instead of disappearing, it gets passed down. As we've learned in previous episodes, trauma affects how we see ourselves, how we relate to others, what we believe we deserve, and the lens we use to interpret the world. So when someone experiences trauma and never gets support, validation, or safety, they begin to see the world through the eyes of fears, scares, or unworthiness. And without realizing it, they pass that lenses to the people they raise, influence, or care for. And this is important. Intergenerational trauma doesn't just come from parents. It can come from grandparents, uncles, aunts, or anyone who shaped our emotional world. Trauma transfers to behaviors, emotions, silence, survival patterns, overprotectiveness, emotional absence, or even harshness. When trauma isn't healed, it changes our nervous system, our emotional patterns, our beliefs, our sense of safety, our attachment style, and the way we love. So we start seeing the world to fear, hyper vigilance, abandonment. Sometimes the story is I'm not enough, I'm not safe, or I must be strong all the time. Then we start passing that fear down to our kids. We pass that emotional distance, we pass the silence, we pass the survival mode. But it's also important to remember it's not because we are bad people, but because we never had a chance to feel safe enough to heal. To take this a little bit further, I want to share how in my family, intergenerational trauma was passed down. And I believe that my story is an example um, of both resilience despite going through so much trauma. You can see how beautiful um, part of that story was, and you're gonna see further how resilience was part of the story, but at the same time you can see how also the trauma was as present too. So today I'm gonna talk about somebody that is, in my eyes, somebody that is my hero. I'm gonna talk about my grandmother, her story, and how eventually that story continued and got passed down to me, and how also I decided to change the story around once I understood um the whole picture, or how when I started healing myself too. My grandmother grew up with her mother and her grandparents up to the age of 6. According to her, her mother, they were already 3 siblings. Um, and her mother died while she was giving birth to a 4th child. And dad was never living with her. She did not grow up living with her father. She grew up knowing her father. She knew him. She would go see him at times, but he wasn't in the home raising her, just like her mom and her grandparents. She always also often talked about how the love between her grandparents, she grew up seeing that they were so close to each other. But when her mother passed away at 6, they raised her a little bit, but also they kept reaching out to her father, who at some point couldn't take care of all 3 of them, and they were separated. So she got separated from her siblings at 6 and was sent to Port-au-Prince to live with an aunt. Um, I believe that aunt was her mom's cousin, who really reassured her dad that she would take care of my grandmother, put her to school, and make sure that she was well taken care of, right? But then when my grandmother came to Port-au-Prince, the whole story changed. So she actually became a restavèk, where she had to take care of her cousins that were older than her. She had to clean, she had to cook, she had to take care of the house, and she would often be um, beaten up really badly at times when things were not done correctly. And I remember her telling the story. She recalled that she never had a bed. She had to sleep on the floor all the time. I remember a story at one point. She said one night she almost died because she had a candle that was by her head where she was on the floor, and something knocked the candle down, and then there was flame everywhere. She got up on time, um, and then she had time to put out the fire. She was able to do that. She was able to put out the fire, and she survived. But I remember her telling that story and how like vivid it was for her, but you can tell how traumatic that was too. So that was all her life. And she said sometimes the neighbors, because she would be beaten up so bad that the neighbors knew about it, and sometimes the neighbor would come and talk to the aunt for her, like, why are you doing this? She's so little, or this is not normal, like why? But she never really stopped, and it continued until my grandmother, I believe she was 16 or 17, she went away. She went away, and then she ended up being on her own. And see, because she didn't really have any other skills but cleaning and cooking, so she went back to working for other people, but this time around she was more of what we call a servant, where she would get paid to clean and either clean or wash clothes or cook at people's houses. And then at some point she started working for a very wealthy family in Port-au-Prince. This family used to make curtains. So they had people, they had a lot of people sewing curtains at their place, at their home. And then one day my grandmother was finishing up her work for that day, and then she was going home, and I guess she went through the space where the people were sitting there and sewing, and she told the people that she wanted to learn, and they asked her, like, you want to do this? She was like, yeah, I want to not only learn how to sew curtain but also clothes. Like, I want to know it all. So she moved from the kitchen to actually sewing. So she learned, they taught her, she learned, and she started working for them by making curtains. And she worked for that family for a while. And but also on the other side, her life continued. She gave birth to my uncle at 19. And my uncle's father wasn't around. He was a tonton Koute. So even though he had a stable job, he worked for the government, but he wasn't present for my uncle. My grandmother had to take care of my uncle on her own. She would work multiple jobs at time, where she would work for the people that she worked for throughout the day, and then when she gets home, she would actually make dresses, or she would sew for the people in the neighborhood. So she had her own business at home. So one thing I know, she really regretted. She really regretted the fact that she was never given the opportunity to go to school and learn how to write and read. So because of that, she made sure that she put my uncle in the best school, one of the best schools that she knew of, despite her being breadwinner and having to work multiple jobs. She was adamant about that. And 11 years later came my mother. And again, my mom's dad wasn't around. Same thing happened. So now she had to take care of two kids. She had to, at times she would work three jobs to be able to afford their schoolings, to be able to put food on the table and take care of them. And another thing she used to do too, um, which really was mind blowing, is how much giving, despite all that was done to her, she would welcome in her home young girls that would come from the countryside. And her home, she would welcome them. My mom would always say that house was always there, busy. It was always people coming from the countryside, and most of these young girls, she didn't know them. Like, they knew of her house as being open house for, young girls like that. And then she would welcome them so they don't become restavèk like she was. And she would teach them how to sew so they can now have skills and go out there and earn money and not having to go through what she went through. They called her mom. They all called her mom because she gave them that, um, because she opened her home for her. Um, but with that, all that also came sometimes not being present for my mom and my uncle. And my mom has stories to where sometimes event would happen at her school, but my grandmother wasn't around because she was working so much. And also sometimes emotionally she was so into survival mode. Emotionally she wasn't present, um because there was so much on her plate. She was the only one working. My mother and uncle grew up with a strong, resilient mother, but also a mother that carried trauma silently. And she learned to show love through her work, through providing, through in to keeping them safe too, because she didn't have that. Despite her not having their dad with her, helping her raising them, she made sure that she did she made sure that she wasn't in a situation to where she had to split them or send them other places for them to be raised by somebody else or to be abused by somebody else. So through her hard work, she did her best. Um, mm, on the other side of this, like I mentioned before, because she has been on survival mode for so long, the softness sometimes was not there. Um, but when I was born, she actually was such an affectionate grandmother. Um, I guess also she somehow had to let go of that survival mode. Um, I grew up with love. She was able to show me affection, love. I was so close to her. Growing up, at some point, my mom. I remember one time my mom expressed how she felt jealous that I was closer to my grandmother than I was to her. um, but yeah, she did that for me and my brother. She did have other grandchildren, um, but they were not living with her because me and my brother, we lived with her. My mom took her home at some point because she was too old. Oh, she was getting older, so my mom didn't want her to live on her own. So my mom took her in. So she was the best grandmother I could have. But also the pattern that I saw growing up was men wasn't part of our story. My uncle was actually one of the few men that I knew, a few cousins, on my grandmother's nephew, right, and then my uncle. It wasn't very few. The men were not there, and you can see how, from my grandmother's story, her dad giving her up. And her dad wasn't even part of the picture, even when her mom was alive. He was there, but not there emotionally, but also wasn't providing. And with my grandmother's experience growing up, so she didn't trust anybody. She did had two kids with two different father, but it wasn't long lasting. Her relationships were not long lasting. And my mom also was married, but also it did not last. So the pattern continued. My uncle got married too, but it didn't last either. At some point, we all were living together. My uncle, my mom, and my grandmother, and then the two of us. So it was kind of like her immediate family only, um, in the house. So um, I could see the pattern, and you can see how it came about. How she she even have stories. I remember she even would say things like, she didn't trust men. It was clear. She was like, um, as a matter of fact, she had two kids. It took them a long time to get there. She was very on the fence at first. These relationships were not they were relationships. They didn't last after the kids were born, like my uncle, my mom, but before that, it was like they would court her. She would take her time. She wasn't nice at first. Then eventually, because they were persistent, it gave her some type of safety. She felt safe. But then once she became pregnant, they went away, or they didn't want to be responsible, and she went back to, you see, men are not trustworthy. So yeah, she would literally flat out say that. So but I am so grateful that when I was able to break the pattern, it was very important to me to have a two-parent household, because I can see the pain in my mom not going up with her father. My grandmother too, at time you can see it show up, especially he gave her away. And my uncle too, you can see how he didn't have um a good relationship with his father. um so sometimes looking at my kids, I feel so happy for them, seeing them being able to feel, being able to live in household, a two-parent household. Sometimes I ask myself, I wonder how it feels. Just the little girl in me ask myself, I want to be in their space, in their place right now, and being able to, have both parents with me, and not just any parents. And there are some people out there that do live in two-parent household, but it's not emotionally safe for them. But I'm so grateful that um, me and my husband were so present emotionally and physically for my kids, and seeing that is so beautiful. So to go back to the topic, intergenerational trauma, breaking cycles doesn't mean blaming the generation before us. It means understanding the context they came from. It means saying, I see why you did what you did. I understand why you didn't have the emotional tools. I understand why survival mattered more than softness, but the cycle stops with me. Right? Breaking cycles look like learning to sit with your emotions, naming what hurts, giving yourself the love nobody knew how to give you, healing your own inner child, choosing awareness over autopilot, choosing softness over silence, choosing connection over distance. And one thing that is coming up for me right now is it's also I have to choose that every day. It's not just choosing the fact that I chose um that person to do life with, my husband that is emotionally present for my kids, but it's the fact to marriage is something that I'm doing not knowing what it's supposed to look like, because I didn't have that growing up. I was 6 when my parents divorced, so I didn't have really any way. Well, I have some recollections, but it's not like I grew up seeing a healthy marriage, and knowing, okay, this is what you do, right, in a healthy marriage. So I'm doing it as a goal. So it's basically every day choosing, right, and creating that safe space that now my kids are seeing, and now they can keep doing again. So breaking cycles means giving the next generation a different story. So intergenerational trauma is real, but so is intergenerational healing. We inherit pain, yes, but we also inherit resilience. We inherit strengths. We inherit the lessons, the courage, and the love our ancestors passed down through their survival. So, in reality, you're not starting from nothing. You continue in a story, and you have the power to change its direction. So let's reflect a little bit. What intergenerational pattern have you begun to notice in your life? So journal about your thoughts. What comes up for you? What are you seeing? Or now that you have some thoughts, right? How about you try to really look at certain patterns in your family, in your community, in places around you that are affecting you, and see what is going on there. Like, what pattern is this? Since when did that pattern start? Did it start with your mom or your aunt or your uncle or whoever it is? That just journal about it and see what comes up for you. This was the topic for today. Thank you for listening. And if this discussion was valuable for you, share it with somebody else that you think might find value in it too. Thank you for listening. Until next time. Thank you so much for tuning in into Wapkute Mapkuteo. I hope today's conversation gave you insights, practical tips, or encouragement to take care of your mental health and continue your healing journey. Be sure to subscribe, leave us a review from wherever you are listening, and share it with someone in your community who might need it too. For those listening from California, you can visit my Alma page in the description below to learn more about my individual therapy sessions and other services I offer. And remember, Wapkute Mapkuteo. Keep prioritizing yourself, keep learning, and let's heal, grow, and thrive together.